Good evening. It's an honor to be here with you. Tonight, you are going to hear me use two words quite a lot. That is victim and survivor. I use the word victim purely in the context of the legal and criminal process. Otherwise, I use the word survivor. This word empowers the victim and is often the turning point for recovery. I was a victim for a long time, and it was only when I became a survivor that I was able to heal properly. Let me tell you why I am a survivor. I was born and raised in South Africa. When I was 15 years old, I emigrated to Australia with my family. I was terrified about the move, but life in Australia was the most freeing, positive experience. I started university straight after high school and began studying forensic medicine. It would take 15 years. The workload in the first semester was overwhelming, and I began to doubt my ability to study for so long. So when a friend proposed deferring university and joining her to live in Paris, I jumped at the chance. In February of 1998, my Paris adventure began. I was 19 years old. I knew very little about France and even less about the language, but this didn't bother me. I knew France was part of my destiny. I quickly picked up the language and the artist in me blossomed. That was the end of forensic medicine, and I began to prepare my portfolio to enter the fine art school in Paris. Life in Paris was exhilarating, a true coming-of-age story. It also had its challenges, and being a self-funding student meant that I had to work part-time. I worked in a bar called The Fifth. It was a wonderful meeting place where people came together to talk about everything in life. We were like family. Little did we know how things would so abruptly change on the 18th of July, 1999. It was 3 a.m. I had just closed up the bar with my colleagues. It had been a double shift, and I was exhausted. I turned down the offer to go for a drink and headed for a taxi instead. I had less than 100 meters to walk down a street that I knew so well. I didn't make it to the taxi that night. A man intercepted my path. What followed was an hour of brutal violence, strangulation, the taste of death, and rape. I fought so hard to get away from my attacker, but the more I fought, the more he beat me, until eventually he was able to get me to the ground and strangle me with his bare hands. I lost consciousness. I thought it was the end of my life. The universe had other plans for me, and a few moments I came to being dragged by my hair up some stairs. I immediately began my struggle to get away. I didn't want to die in Paris. My attacker was prepared. He had a gun, a knife, and a can of mace. He threatened to shoot me. He used the knife to cut me, and the mace served as a tool to make his punch more brutal. The attack just kept getting more and more violent, until a fist punch to my eye caused a loud popping sound in my head, and I realized that if I continued to fight physically, I was going to die. Something switched. I remembered a story from my last year of high school, a story of survival and techniques of how to escape a dangerous situation. I began conversing with my attacker. I told him that I was terminally ill and that I'd be dead by the end of the year. He didn't believe me at first and hit me even harder. I kept talking. I shared personal details of my life with this man. I clung to this story as if it was truth. It didn't stop him from hurting me or raping me, but it did humanize me. And I believe with every cell in my body, it's what saved my life that night. As I lay on the streets of Paris, naked and beaten, trying to locate my torn clothing, I sensed the severity of my injuries and knew I would have to go to hospital. If I went to hospital, I'd have to report the attack. I had heard horror stories about how rape was handled in Paris. That night, I made the decision with myself to face the difficult journey of being a rape survivor. I waited for 5 hours in ER before a doctor came to see me. To make it worse, he looked identical to my attacker. Now, in any other situation, this is not an issue, but for a rape survivor, it's catastrophic. It is commonly referred to being raped a second or a third time by the system. Good trauma response is critical for a victim's survival and is often where the system fails them. My dreams of becoming an artist in Paris were shattered. I stayed on in France for a few more months to help the police with their investigation and to have medical follow-up for all of my injuries. The police didn't catch the man, and in 2000, I returned to live in Australia and attempted to restart my life. I quickly went into denial and became so busy that I didn't have time to think about what had happened to me. I didn't allow myself to heal properly. This all changed in June 2009. 3 weeks before the 10-year mark of my rape, the French police contacted me. They asked if I could get to Paris within 48 hours to do a lineup. They believed they had caught my attacker. He had reoffended and there was a DNA match. Fortunately, I was living in Switzerland and could get to Paris in time. I ID'd my attacker immediately. Even after 10 years, I remembered this man so clearly. The memories of that fatal night came flooding back and my world began to crumble. I was plunged into the most traumatic period of my life. In France, a victim of crime has to declare themselves a civil party in criminal proceedings. This meant that I had to find and pay for a lawyer. It cost me more than $40,000 to put my attacker in jail. In November 2011, 2.5 years after my attacker was apprehended, he was sentenced to 12 years in jail. But in June 2013, he was released on parole. He only served a quarter of his sentence. The irony is that my battle with the French justice continued until October 2015. Not once did the system treat me with kindness or compassion. Instead, it made me feel like the guilty party over and over again. My story of survival lasted 16 years, most of my adult life. I knew deep down there was a bigger purpose, and one day I would use my story to make a difference in the world. I began talking openly about my story 3 years ago. The most powerful thing that has happened since sharing my story is that I have given others the courage to do the same. Women, men, and children have opened up to me, some having never told anyone before. What I've realized from these stories is that there are many shades of sexual violence, not just rape. And unlike my story, most survivors know their offender. It is also clear that there is absolutely no stereotype when it comes to sexual violence. It doesn't matter what country you come from, what age you might be, what beliefs you have. It doesn't matter if you're a woman, a man, or a child, heterosexual, homosexual, asexual, rich, poor, or in between. Sexual violence will cross all of these boundaries. 1 in 4 women will experience sexual violence in her lifetime. 1 in 6 men will be sexually abused before the age of 18 years old. In the USA, a person is sexually assaulted every 90 seconds. Now, to give you an idea of the gravity of these statistics, let's look at cancer. In the USA, 1 in 8 women will be affected by cancer in her lifetime. That means she is twice as likely to be sexually violated than she is to get cancer. 1 in 8 men will be affected by prostate cancer. That means that he is more likely to be sexually abused than he is to get prostate cancer. These statistics just get scarier when we start looking at children. 230 million children are sexually abused each year. This makes sexual violence one of the largest epidemics of our time. So why can't we talk about it? Why the taboo? Why the shame? I often hear people say it's just a personal issue and not something to discuss openly. Or even worse, it's just a woman's issue. These assumptions are wrong. They create an unsafe environment for survivors to speak out, and they propagate what we call rape culture. We currently live in a world that blames the victim, promotes silence, and has laws that exclude certain gender groups. It's not about she. It's not about he. It's about us. We so desperately need an inclusive global dialogue. 1 year ago, I began doing just that. I quit my job, I sold all of my personal belongings to raise enough money to get started, and I have dedicated the next 4 years of my life to being a voice for women, men, and children affected by sexual violence. Sometimes the only way to solve a problem is to tackle it from a completely different angle. Sport unites us. Sport brings communities together to make a stand for something they believe in. Sport is also important for the healing process. When you have survived something as traumatic as rape or sexual assault, it is essential to heal emotionally as well as physically. Running became an integral part of my own healing, and it got me through some of the darkest days of my life. We can change the outcome on sexual violence if we change how we talk about it. The trick is to make the uncomfortable comfortable. That is why I am using adventure travel and sport to bring people together around the world and join me in this peaceful dialogue. I am running 16 kilometers of beach, that's 10 miles, barefoot, in every coastal country of the world. 184 countries and over 3,000 kilometers of beach in support of survivors of sexual violence. It is called Footsteps to Inspire. I have very rarely run alone, and I have noticed a common trend across most of the countries visited so far. People want to talk about sexual violence. They just don't know how to. Through Footsteps to Inspire, I am creating a safe place for conversation and understanding. This global beach run will take me 4 years to complete, and I move countries every 7 to 10 days. I have already been to 26 countries, and tomorrow I run on beach number 27, here in St. Thomas. I had no idea what to expect when I started out. No one else has created this kind of movement before. It hasn't been easy. Actually, nothing about it is easy. Every day I hear stories of horror and sometimes stories of hope. People often ask me, why do I do this? Don't I want to put my story behind me and forget about what happened? I can't. It's part of who I am now. The woman I would have become before my rape is not the woman I am today. I don't see this as negative. We get to choose how we let trauma impact our lives. Either we see it as a lifetime of suffering, or we move through that and it becomes something else. It becomes something that makes us stronger. It becomes something that we can use to help others. This is how I see it. I have taken my tragedy and turned it into triumph, inspiring hope in the hearts of many still suffering in silence. I began the journey 1 year ago on the 18th of July in South Africa, my country of birth. Country number 5, Papua New Guinea in the Pacific Islands, was a turning point for me. Rape and murder is an everyday reality in this country and starts as young as 6 months. 200 people joined me for this run, mostly locals. I remember turning the corner and seeing this huge group of people and wanting to cry. Papua New Guineans want change. They want to be able to speak about sexual violence. They want to feel safe. I left Papua New Guinea feeling humbled and happy to know that I had made a small impact. Me, this insignificant rape survivor, had made a difference. I had to keep going. Each country is different. Each country teaches me something else. I can't even imagine what I will hear and see by the time I am finished. I've spoken to you a lot about making a difference on a global level, but the true essence of Footsteps to Inspire is to directly impact local communities. I invite you here in St. Thomas to join me and make a difference for yourself, your family, and your friends. The reality is that many of you in this audience already have a story of survival. Sadly, there is nothing we can do to unchange that. But what we can do together is make your community a safer space to speak out and to help each other. Here are 3 things you can start doing from tonight. I've given each one a hashtag so that you can spread the message and use it as a reminder. I believe you. This starts with you first. If someone has intentionally violated you, it's not okay. You are allowed to believe everything you are feeling. Don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. If someone reaches out to you for help, please believe them. Don't try and justify what happened. All you need to say is, I believe you. It was not your fault. Again, this starts with you first. If you have a story and you're doubting yourself, stop. It was not your fault. No form of sexual violence is okay. It is never the victim's fault. No one is ever asking for it. Sexual violence is not about sex. It's about the abuse of power. It's about forcing someone to do something they have not consented to. How can I help you? Hearing someone's experience of sexual violence is confronting. Dedicate a run, a walk, or some form of sporting activity to raising awareness around this difficult issue of sexual violence. We are not alone, and together we can make our communities and our countries a safer place. Imagine one day a world free of sexual violence. Together, we can make a difference, one footstep to inspire at a time. Thank you.